In the glass towers of corporate America, silence is often mistaken for weakness. They forget that the most powerful forces in nature, gravity, time, the slow tectonic shift that builds mountains, are utterly silent until the moment they choose to change everything. For Alara Hayes, that moment had just arrived, though no one in the sterile, breathtakingly expensive boardroom of Innovatech Dynamics could possibly have known it. The air, chilled to a perfect 68 degrees, was thick with the cloying scent of success, a success that was not hers to claim. On the large screen, the final slide of the Project Chimera presentation glowed, a testament to 18 months of sleepless nights, relentless coding, and a creative vision that had been ripped from her very soul. Standing at the podium, bathed in the soft light of the projector, were Marcus Thorne, her charismatic and politically flawless boss, and Chloe Sterling, her best friend, her only friend. They smiled, they accepted the applause from the board of directors, they spoke of their vision and their tireless effort. Alara watched from a small chair pushed against the wall, a ghost at her own celebration. Just 10 minutes earlier, when she had tried to rise, to speak the truth that Chimera was her creation from the very first line of code, Marcus had silenced her with a look of pure ice, before leaning in and whispering a single, brutal phrase: "Don't embarrass yourself." Now it was over. The lie had been told, and it had been believed. The board was ecstatic. Chloe was given a standing ovation, and Alara was an afterthought, a loose end to be tied up. The meeting concluded, and as the executives filed out, patting Marcus and Chloe on the back, an HR representative approached her with a practiced, sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. The termination was swift, clinical. Behavior not aligned with company values. Failure to be a team player. The words were meaningless noise. The truth was a sharp, cold knife twisting in her gut. She had been used, betrayed, and discarded. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply nodded, a silent, almost imperceptible dip of her head. Walking back to her small desk in the vast open-plan office felt like wading through deep water. Every head that had been eagerly watching the presentation feed was now studiously buried in a screen. The silence was no longer respectful. It was suffocating, accusatory. They saw her not as a wronged colleague, but as a problem that had been solved. As she placed the few personal items from her desk, a worn copy of a poetry book, a small potted succulent, a framed photo of a grandfather she barely knew into a brown cardboard box, she could feel their pity, and worse, their relief. She was trash being taken out. As she walked toward the elevator, the box held tight against her chest, she took one last look back. Chloe was now sitting at a new, larger desk, the one that was meant to be hers, laughing with Marcus. In that moment, the profound, soul-crushing pain inside of her didn't vanish. It simply changed. It cooled, it hardened, it sharpened into something new, a purpose. She walked out of the gleaming glass doors of Innovatech Dynamics, not as a victim stumbling into the cold afternoon sun, but as a queen, quietly leaving the castle to fetch her armies. The game was not over. It had just been set. To understand the depth of the betrayal, you must first understand the architect who was left in the shadows. Alara Hayes was not a product of the slick, fast-paced world she had chosen to enter. She was a quiet storm, born and raised in the rolling, unassuming farmlands of rural Pennsylvania, a place where success was measured by the sweat on your brow and the honesty of your handshake. Her mind, however, did not operate on the scale of acres and seasons. It operated in the silent, shimmering world of data. For Alara, numbers were not cold, hard facts. They were a language. In the endless streams of code and statistics, she could see stories, predict echoes of the future, and find the elegant, hidden patterns that others dismissed as noise. She was, in the truest sense of the word, a prodigy. A gift she kept carefully concealed behind a shy demeanor and a preference for listening over speaking. When she first walked into the gleaming, cathedral-like lobby of Innovatech Dynamics, it felt like stepping into the future she had always dreamed of. The company was a titan of the industry, a name synonymous with cutting-edge innovation. Their mission statements, plastered in artistic fonts on the polished concrete walls, spoke of collaboration, meritocracy, and changing the world. For a girl who had always believed that good, honest work was its own reward, this felt like finding her promised land. She was assigned to the Strategic Analysis Department, a nerve center of the company, led by the man who seemed to embody the Innovatech ideal, Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a masterpiece of corporate sculpture. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a smile that could disarm regulators and a voice that flowed like warm honey, he possessed an almost magical ability to make every person he spoke to feel like they were the most important person in the room. He noticed Ilara's talent early on, not in a public celebratory way, but in a quiet, almost predatory manner. In a team meeting, when a complex dataset had everyone stumped, Ilara, after minutes of silent contemplation, offered a solution so simple and yet so profound that the room fell silent. Marcus had paused, looked at her with a flicker of genuine surprise, and then, without missing a beat, he had reframed her idea, using more confident, corporate-friendly language, and presented it as a path he was just beginning to explore. He finished with a small, conspiratorial wink in her direction, a silent message that said, "I see you. Stick with me, and you'll learn how this game is really played." To the naive Ilara, it felt like being brought into an inner circle. In reality, he had just identified his next great resource. The department was a reflection of its leader, a polished surface hiding a relentless, churning competition. It was a court, and Marcus was its king. He had his favorites, a clique of loud, confident analysts who mimicked his speech patterns and laughed a little too hard at his jokes. They were the ones who got the high-profile projects, the invitations to after-work drinks, the casual mentions in meetings with upper management. Ilara was not one of them. She was quiet, she was different, she was an outsider. Her ideas, when she worked up the courage to voice them, were often met with blank stares or condescending smiles, only to be subtly repurposed by a member of Marcus's clique a week later, repackaged and presented as their own. She was a ghost in the machine, the invisible engine running in the background, and the isolation was a heavy, suffocating cloak. And then there was Chloe Sterling. If Marcus was the king, Chloe was the charming, indispensable duchess of the court. She was everything Ilara wasn't. Effortlessly social, witty, and universally liked. On Ilara's first, terrifying week, it was Chloe who had appeared at her desk with 2 cups of coffee, offering a genuine, warm smile and a guided tour of the office's unwritten social rules. She had taken Ilara under her wing, becoming her translator, her defender, and so Ilara believed her friend. They had lunch together every day, sharing stories of their lives outside the office walls. Ilara spoke of her quiet hometown, her love for complex problems, her dreams of earning a place at the company based purely on her own merit. Chloe listened, always so intently, her eyes filled with what looked like sincere admiration. "You're a genuine genius, Ilara," she would often say, shaking her head in amazement. "Don't let these empty suits intimidate you. Your work speaks for itself." It was Chloe who encouraged Ilara to share her more ambitious concepts with her, late at night over takeout containers at their desks, long after the rest of the office had gone home. Chloe would listen, ask probing, intelligent questions, and help Ilara refine her presentations. It felt like a true partnership, a small island of trust in an ocean of ambition. Ilara, starved for connection and validation, clung to this friendship like a life raft. She didn't notice the subtle, hungry gleam in Chloe's eyes when she explained a particularly brilliant piece of her logic. She didn't register the way Chloe would carefully document her ideas under the guise of helping her stay organized. She didn't question why their late-night sessions often occurred just before Chloe had a one-on-one meeting with Marcus. The truth, hidden behind the warm smiles and supportive words, was that Chloe Sterling was a creature of profound jealousy and ravenous ambition. She had the social skills and the political savvy Ilara lacked. But she knew, in the deepest, most insecure parts of her soul, that she did not possess a fraction of Ilara's raw, intuitive talent. She saw Ilara not as a friend, but as an unpolished diamond mine that she, and she alone, had the key to. She wasn't Ilara's ally. She was her translator, yes, but she was translating Ilara's genius into a language that Marcus could understand, and more importantly, a language he could claim. And so the stage was set, long before Project Chimera ever had a name. There was the quiet, trusting architect, the charming, manipulative king, and the smiling, backstabbing confidant. In the brutal ecosystem of innovatic dynamics, where credit was currency and power was the only real prize, a genius who didn't guard her work was not a valued asset. She was simply an opportunity waiting to be seized. It began, as all great corporate tragedies do, with an opportunity disguised as a miracle. The summons came on a Tuesday morning, not through a calendar invite or a casual Slack message, but a direct, discreet email from Marcus Thorne himself. The subject line contained a single, cryptic word: Chimera. He wanted to see her in Conference Room Delta, a small, soundproofed glass box typically reserved for contract negotiations and executive firings. When Alara arrived, he was alone, standing before a whiteboard that was, for the first time she could remember, completely blank. The air was still, heavy with a significance that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. Marcus didn't waste time with pleasantries. He began to speak, his voice low and conspiratorial, painting a picture not of a project, but of a holy grail. For years, Innovatech Dynamics, like all its competitors, had been reactive, analyzing market shifts after they occurred. They were historians of the present moment. But what if, he posited, they could become prophets? What if they could build an engine that didn't just analyze data, but could predict it? An engine that could ingest the chaotic noise of global markets, consumer sentiment, supply chain logistics, and even the whispers of political instability, and, in return, produce a clear, terrifyingly accurate vision of the future. It would be a crystal ball built of code, a strategic advantage so profound it would be less like a tool and more like a superpower. This, he said with a dramatic pause, was Project Chimera. He told her the project was a secret, known only to himself and the CEO. It was too ambitious, too revolutionary to be trusted to the normal development pipeline. It needed a single, visionary architect, someone who could build it from the ground up, someone who didn't just see the numbers, but could feel the invisible connections between them. He turned to her then, his gaze intense, making her feel as though she were the only person in the world who could possibly understand. "This isn't for my usual guys, Ilara," he said, his voice a velvet whisper. "They see the spreadsheets. You hear the music." And then came the promise, the gilded key that unlocked the final chamber of her ambition. The position of lead data scientist, a role that would give her her own team, her own resources, and a voice in the company's direction, was set to open up in the next quarter. "Officially," Marcus explained, leaning against the table, "I have to conduct a full round of interviews. It's a procedural nightmare, but unofficially." He let the word hang in the air, a shimmering temptation. "You deliver Chimera, and that job is yours. No interviews, no committees, no questions asked. We'll announce your promotion. At the same meeting, we unveil the project. It will be a coronation." For Alara, it was the culmination of every hope she had brought with her to this company. It was not just a promotion, it was a validation, a testament to the idea that her quiet, relentless work had finally been seen. She accepted without a moment's hesitation, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Marcus gave her a key card to a small, isolated office at the end of a rarely used hallway, a war room where she could work undisturbed. Her exile, which had once been a source of pain, was now rebranded as a mark of distinction. She was the chosen one, hidden away to forge the company's future. What followed was not work. It was a total, all-consuming immersion. Alara's life outside the walls of that small office ceased to exist. Days bled into nights and back into days. Her diet consisted of vending machine snacks and lukewarm coffee. She slept on a small cot she brought in, often for only 2 or 3 hours at a time, waking with the solution to an algorithmic problem burning in her mind. The blank whiteboard in her new office was soon covered in a sprawling, beautiful chaos of equations, flowcharts, and theoretical models. She was an artist creating her masterpiece, a composer writing her symphony. She built the core architecture, the foundational pillars of logic that would support the entire structure. She designed the neural networks, teaching the machine to learn, to adapt, to see patterns that no human ever could. The project became an extension of her own mind, her own soul, a living entity that breathed with the elegance and complexity of her thoughts. It was during the second month of this relentless seclusion that Chloe began her campaign. She appeared at Alara's door one evening, her face a perfect mask of concern. "My God, Alara," she said, her voice full of pity. "You look like a ghost. You can't keep doing this to yourself. You need help." Alara, exhausted and lonely, was too grateful for the human contact to be suspicious. Chloe started by bringing her food, real food that wasn't wrapped in plastic. She would sit with Alara while she ate, asking about her progress, her expression one of unwavering support. Soon, the offers of help became more specific. "Let me handle the data cleanup for you," she'd offer. "It's tedious work, and it's stealing time from your real genius." Then it was documentation. "You're a creator, not a scribe," Chloe would insist. "Just talk me through the code, and I'll write up the technical specifications. We'll move twice as fast." Alara, lost in the creative storm of her work, saw this as an act of profound friendship. She would stand at the whiteboard for hours, excitedly explaining the intricacies of her creation, the years of knowledge and intuition pouring out of her. She was a master teacher, and Chloe was her star pupil. Alara never noticed that Chloe's notes were far more detailed than any documentation required. She never saw that Chloe was not just taking notes on the what, but on the why and the how. Chloe was absorbing everything, creating a flawless, high-fidelity copy of Alara's thought process. She learned the language of chimera, not just how to speak it, but how to perform it. Under the guise of lightening Alara's load, she was methodically downloading the contents of her friend's brilliant mind. Standing amidst the tangled wires and glowing screens of the war room, Alara would often look at Chloe, diligently typing away, and feel a wave of deep, sincere gratitude. She wasn't alone in this. They were a team. They were building this miracle together, and soon they would share in its triumph. She was completely, utterly, and blissfully wrong. She wasn't building a partnership. She was meticulously crafting the weapon that would be used to destroy her. The project was breathing. In the silent, sterile confines of her war room, Alara could feel it. Project Chimera was no longer just a collection of algorithms and datasets. It had evolved into something more, a nascent consciousness humming within the servers of Innovatech Dynamics. It could see correlations across continents and decades, drawing elegant, invisible lines between a drought in South America, a tweet from a European financier, and the future stock price of a tech company in Asia. It was performing exactly as she had designed, exceeding even her most optimistic projections. This should have been the most triumphant period of her professional life, a time of pure, unadulterated creation. Instead, a thin, cold fog of anxiety had begun to roll in, clinging to the edges of her mind, a persistent whisper that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The whispers began as fleeting, discordant notes in the symphony of her work. The first was a visual, a scene glimpsed through the floor to ceiling glass walls that defined the office landscape. She was walking back from the kitchen, a fresh mug of coffee in hand, when she saw them. Marcus and Chloe, huddled together in a small conference room she knew was booked under a vague strategic planning title. They were leaning over a laptop, their heads close together, and Chloe was pointing at the screen, speaking with an animation Alara had never seen from her before. Marcus was nodding, his expression one of intense focus. Alara instinctively knew, with a certainty that made the coffee feel cold in her stomach, that they were looking at Chimera's core interface. She paused, half hidden by a large potted fig tree. As if sensing her presence, Chloe looked up, and their eyes met for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something unreadable: panic? Guilt? Crossed Chloe's face before it was replaced by a bright, wide smile and a cheerful wave. Marcus looked up a moment later, his own smile effortless and charming. The gesture was meant to be inclusive, but it felt like a curtain being hastily drawn. It started happening more frequently. Hallway conversations that would abruptly stop when she approached, replaced by talk of weekend plans or a new restaurant. Emails from Marcus about the project's high-level strategy would have Chloe copied, with action items assigned to her that seemed to bleed into Alara's territory of core functionality. It was a subtle, creeping erosion of her ownership, so gradual that she could almost convince herself she was imagining it. But then came the incident that was impossible to ignore. Alara had been pulled into a general department meeting, a rare emergence from her solitude, to consult on a minor analytics problem. As Marcus was wrapping up, he was discussing the future of predictive modeling. "We need to move beyond simple data analysis," he announced, pacing before the screen. "We need to achieve what I call data harmonics. The ability to see the resonance between seemingly disconnected data points." The phrase struck Alara like a physical blow. Data harmonics. It was a term she had coined one late night, scribbled on her whiteboard while explaining a particularly abstract concept to Chloe. It was her own private poetry for the beauty she saw in the numbers. It was not a corporate buzzword, it was a piece of her soul. Marcus continued, gesturing towards Chloe. "In fact, I have to credit Chloe for that elegant phrasing during one of our recent brainstorming sessions. It perfectly captures the new paradigm we're aiming for." He smiled at Chloe, a look of public praise for a private triumph. Chloe, in turn, glanced at Alara, her expression a carefully crafted mix of modesty and shared success, a tiny shrug that seemed to say, "It's for the good of the project." But Alara saw something else in that moment. She saw the cold, clear gleam of appropriation. The whisper was no longer a whisper. It was a voice, and it was telling her she was being erased. That evening, she confronted them. She waited in her war room, the hum of the servers her only company, until Chloe arrived with her customary offer of dinner. Alara didn't attack. Her nature was to question, to understand. "Chloe," she began, her voice quieter than she intended, "I've noticed you and Marcus are meeting a lot about Chimera without me. And today," he used my phrase, "data harmonics, and said it was yours." She laid the facts out plainly, hoping for an explanation that would make the cold knot in her stomach disappear. Chloe's reaction was a masterwork of emotional manipulation. Her face fell, her eyes widening with what appeared to be genuine hurt. "Alara, is that what you think?" she asked, her voice laced with disappointment. "That we're cutting you out?" She sat down, leaning forward, her tone becoming earnest and confidential. "Listen, Marcus is grooming us. He thinks you're a pure-blooded genius, but he knows you hate the politics, the schmoozing, the corporate nonsense. He's teaching me how to handle all of that. How to present the project to the board, how to field the dumb questions from the VPs, how to build a narrative around it. He's making me the shield, Alara. We are protecting you and your work from all the bureaucracy that would otherwise crush it. We're a team. He handles the air cover, I handle the ground war, and you are the brilliant mind who makes it all possible." The phrase? It was a test. He wanted to see if the executives would respond to that kind of language. "I should have told you, and I'm sorry, but it was all part of the strategy." It was a brilliant explanation, one that recast deceit as protection and exclusion as a form of reverence. It played directly into Alara's own insecurities about her social awkwardness and her desire to believe in her only friend. The explanation was a balm on a wound she desperately wanted to heal. She looked at Chloe, at her sincere, pleading eyes, and her own resolve began to crumble. Maybe she was being paranoid. She was sleep-deprived, stressed, living and breathing nothing but code for months. Perhaps this truly was how things worked at the highest levels. To believe otherwise would mean that her friend was a liar and her mentor was a user, and that the entire foundation of her life at Innovatic was a lie. It was a truth too devastating to accept, so she chose to believe. She pushed the whispers down, burying her doubts under the final, frantic push to complete the project. She told herself the secret meetings and the stolen words were just a part of the game she didn't understand. She retreated back into the pure, clean world of her code, a world where logic was king and intentions were always clear. It was her sanctuary, her refuge from the confusing, treacherous world of human ambition. A few weeks later, with a final keystroke, Project Chimera was complete. It was perfect, a flawless engine of prediction. She compiled the final build, attached it to an email addressed to Marcus Thorne and Chloe Sterling, and wrote a simple, two-word body. "It's done." As she hit send, the whispers in her mind fell silent, replaced by a deep and profound sense of foreboding. The architect had just handed over the keys to her cathedral, unaware that the people she had trusted with them were not coming to worship. They were coming to burn it down, with her inside. The day of the presentation dawned crisp and clear, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue that seemed like a perfect omen. Ilara had barely slept, but her exhaustion was eclipsed by a thrumming, nervous energy that felt like electricity under her skin. This was the day, the culmination of everything. The coronation. She dressed with more care than she ever had before, choosing a simple but professional navy blue dress, an outfit that she hoped projected a quiet confidence. In her mind, she ran through her opening lines, the key points she wanted to make, the story of Chimera's creation that she was so eager to tell. She arrived at the office early, her presentation loaded onto a flash drive, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She saw Chloe by the coffee machine, who gave her a bright, encouraging smile. "Ready for the big day?" Chloe asked, her eyes sparkling. "You'll be amazing." Ilara smiled back, a genuine, grateful smile. The last vestiges of her doubt melted away in the warmth of her friend's confidence. The main boardroom at Innovatech Dynamics was on the top floor, a cavern of glass and steel that offered a godlike, panoramic view of the sprawling city below. The long, obsidian table reflected the faces of the company's most powerful figures. The stoic CEO, Arthur Sterling, no relation to Chloe, a fact she often lamented, the stern-faced CFO, and the rest of the board, a collection of industry titans who radiated an aura of intimidating, old-money power. Ilara took a seat in one of the chairs lining the wall, her designated spot, waiting for Marcus to call her up. Marcus and Chloe stood at the head of the room, arranging their notes on the lectern. Marcus caught her eye and gave her a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture she interpreted as, "Get ready, your moment is coming." The room quieted. Marcus began to speak, his voice resonating with practiced authority. He was a master orator, weaving a narrative of challenge and innovation. He spoke of the company's past, its present, and the quantum leap it was about to take into the future. "For months," he declared, his voice rising with theatrical gravity, "a small, dedicated team has been working in secret on a project that will not just put us ahead of the curve, but will allow us to redraw the curve itself. A project we call Chimera." He paused, letting the name settle in the silent, expectant room. Ilara felt a surge of pride so intense it almost made her dizzy. He was setting the stage perfectly, her stage. And the visionary who led this incredible effort, Marcus continued, his eyes sweeping across the board, the strategist who worked day and night, who poured her very soul into bringing this revolutionary concept to life, is our own rising star. He paused again, for effect. This was it. Ilara's muscles tensed, her body preparing to stand, a shy smile already forming on her lips. The entire universe seemed to hold its breath. Chloe Sterling. The name landed in the silent room with the force of a physical explosion, yet made no sound. For a moment, Ilara's brain simply refused to process it. It was a glitch, a mistake, a slip of the tongue. But then, a polite, scattered applause broke out as Chloe, beaming with a radiant, polished confidence, stepped forward to the lectern. The world tilted on its axis, the blood draining from Ilara's face, a cold, roaring sound filling her ears. It wasn't a mistake, it was a coup. Chloe began to speak, and the second, more profound horror washed over Ilara. The voice was Chloe's, but the words, the passion, the very essence of the presentation were hers. Chloe spoke of the initial spark of the idea, of the architectural philosophy, of the elegant, intricate logic that formed the project's core. She used the metaphors Ilara had created, the analogies she had developed to explain the unexplainable. She even used the phrase data harmonics, presenting it with a flourish, as if it were a jewel she had cut and polished herself. It was a flawless performance, a perfect recitation. She wasn't just presenting the work, she was inhabiting the creator, wearing Ilara's mind like a bespoke suit. Ilara sat frozen, a statue in a nightmare, watching a phantom version of herself receive the acclaim for her life's work. The board was captivated, leaning forward, their stern faces breaking into expressions of awe. The presentation ended, and the questions began. Chloe handled them with an unnerving poise, fielding complex technical queries with the answers Alara had so painstakingly prepared her with during their late-night rehearsals. The praise from the CEO was effusive. "Astounding, Miss Sterling? Truly astounding. This is the kind of leadership that defines the future of this company." The lie was being calcified, written into the official history of Innovatech in real time. The roaring in Alara's ears became a single, desperate thought. Say something. Say something now, or it's gone forever. As the applause subsided, she found her voice. It came out as a fragile, wavering tremor. That's not right." The room fell instantly silent. Every single head turned towards her, their expressions ranging from confusion to annoyance. The CEO frowned. Marcus turned, his face a carefully constructed mask of concern. "Excuse me?" he said, as if he hadn't heard her. "The work," Alara managed, her voice cracking as she stood on trembling legs. "Project Chimera. It's mine. I designed it. I built it. Every line of code." A tense, deeply uncomfortable silence descended. Chloe looked at her with an expression of profound pity, as if Alara were a beloved pet that had suddenly turned rabid. It was Marcus who broke the silence, his tone one of paternal disappointment. He walked over and gently placed a hand on her arm. "Alara, we're in the middle of a board meeting," he said softly, yet loud enough for everyone to hear. "Perhaps this isn't the time or the place." "But it's the truth," she pleaded, her voice rising with panicked desperation. "Chloe helped, but it was my project. You promised me." Marcus cut her off, his grip on her arm tightening almost imperceptibly. His voice was still calm, but it now carried a sharp, metallic edge. "Alara was a vital member of the technical support team," he announced to the room, his words carefully chosen to both praise and diminish her. "Her coding skills were an invaluable asset in executing the vision. But she is clearly overwrought. The pressure of the launch has been immense for everyone." He was painting a picture for the board. She was a mere cog in the machine, a talented but unstable technician who was now, embarrassingly, trying to claim the glory of the architects. The board members exchanged knowing glances. They had seen this type of thing before. "That's enough," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper meant only for her, though the finality in his tone was clear to all. "You are making a scene. Do not embarrass yourself, or this company, any further." The threat was clear. The public execution was complete. Alara stood there, mute and shaking, stripped bare under the cold, dismissive gazes of the most powerful people in her world. The moment was over. She had lost. Marcus smoothly turned back to the board, seamlessly transitioning back to the celebration of Chloe's triumph. The conversation resumed, flowing around her as if she were a rock in a stream, an irrelevant obstacle. The final round of applause for Chloe was thunderous, a deafening roar that sealed the theft and cemented her erasure. The architect had been rendered invisible in her own cathedral. The applause from the boardroom was a distant, roaring sea that Alara could still hear as she stood frozen in the hallway. The attendees, flushed with excitement over the company's brilliant future, filed past her, their conversations a meaningless buzz. They moved around her like she was a piece of furniture, their eyes either sliding right over her or, in the case of a few who recognized her from the meeting, quickly averting their gaze with a flicker of embarrassment. She was no longer a person. She was an awkward situation, a social inconvenience to be ignored. The last person out of the room, besides Marcus and Chloe, was not the CEO or a board member, but a woman from Human Resources named Brenda, whose smile was as professionally beige as her pantsuit. Brenda's expression was one of practiced, impersonal sympathy. "Alara," she said, her voice soft but firm, "could you come with me for a moment, please?" It wasn't a question, it was a summons. The walk to the HR department on the 15th floor was the longest walk of Alara's life. It was a journey through a world that was no longer hers. People she had passed in the hallways for nearly 2 years, people with whom she had exchanged polite greetings, now found the patterns on the industrial carpeting to be utterly fascinating. The low hum of the office, the clicking of keyboards, the distant ringing of a phone, it all sounded alien, the soundtrack to a life she was no longer a part of. Her mind was a maelstrom of white noise and fractured images. Chloe's triumphant smile, Marcus's icy glare, the dismissive looks of the board members. The shock was so profound it was like a physical anesthetic, numbing her to everything but a dull, hollow ache in her chest. Brenda's office was a small, neat cube with a single, healthy-looking fern in the corner. It was a room designed to be calming and utterly forgettable. Brenda gestured for Alara to sit, then took her own seat behind a clean, uncluttered desk. She folded her hands. "Alara," she began, her tone a perfect blend of corporate procedure and feigned concern. "What happened in the boardroom today was very unfortunate. At Innovatech, we pride ourselves on fostering a collaborative and professional environment. The outburst, it was not in alignment with our core values." The words were smooth, polished, and utterly meaningless, a script that had been recited countless times before. Alara said nothing. She couldn't. Her voice was trapped somewhere deep inside her, crushed under the weight of the betrayal. Brenda continued, her gaze fixed slightly above Alara's head. "Due to the disruptive nature of the incident and what has been deemed an act of gross insubordination in front of the board, we have made the difficult decision to terminate your employment, effective immediately." The words, clinical and final, hung in the sterile air. A box of tissues was pushed gently across the desk in her direction, a preemptive and insulting gesture. Alara didn't reach for it. Her eyes were dry. The feeling was too deep for tears. A thick packet of papers was placed next to the tissues. It was her severance agreement. A few weeks' pay in exchange for her silence, her signature on a non-disclosure agreement that would legally gag her from ever telling the truth of what happened in that room. It was the final turn of the screw, the price of her own erasure. She was escorted back to her desk by a silent security guard, a clear signal to the rest of the office of her new pariah status. If the walk to HR had been uncomfortable, the walk back was an exercise in pure humiliation. As they stepped into the vast, open-plan space, a wave of silence rolled ahead of them. The rhythmic sound of typing ceased. Every head, which had previously been so studiously averted, now turned to watch the spectacle. She was a gladiator being led out of the arena after a fatal defeat, and her colleagues were the silent, morbidly curious crowd. She could feel their gazes on her back, a mixture of pity, fear, and a dark, unspoken relief that it wasn't them. Her desk, a small island in a sea of workstations, looked alien and insignificant. The security guard stood a few feet away, a silent, uniformed statue, holding an empty cardboard box. And then she saw them. Marcus was on the phone at his desk, his back to her, his voice calm and authoritative as if nothing had happened, and Chloe was sitting at a new desk. A large corner desk with 2 monitors and a better view. The desk that Marcus had described to her, the one that came with the lead data scientist position. Her desk. Chloe was typing an email, her brow furrowed in concentration. As Alara walked past, not 10 feet from her, Chloe did not look up. She did not flinch. She offered no glance of apology, no flicker of guilt, not even a glint of triumph. She offered only the coldest, most profound thing of all, complete and utter indifference. In that moment, Alara Hayes ceased to exist for her. With trembling hands, Alara began to pack. The movements were slow, robotic. Into the box went the worn paperback of poetry, its corners soft from use. In went the small succulent, a resilient little plant that had been her quiet companion through countless late nights. And last, in went the small, silver-framed photograph of her grandfather, the quiet, brilliant man whose legacy she had never truly understood. She was not just packing her belongings. She was gathering the small, pathetic remnants of the person she had tried to be here. A diligent worker, a creative mind, a good friend. The box felt heavy, not with the weight of its contents, but with the weight of her failure. The final walk, past the rows of silent colleagues, past Chloe's new desk, past Marcus's closed office door, was a blur. The security guard took her ID badge without a word, the snip of his scissors as he cut it in half, a final severing sound. The heavy glass doors of the lobby slid open and then whispered shut behind her, sealing her out. She was on the street, standing on a busy downtown sidewalk in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. The city pulsed with life around her cars, honking, people talking, the whole world moving forward. But her own world had come to a dead, silent stop. She looked down at the brown cardboard box in her arms, then back up at the gleaming, impossibly tall glass tower of Innovatech Dynamics. It looked like a monument of ice, impersonal and untouchable. The sun reflected off its surface, blinding her. She had poured her soul into that building, and in return, it had taken everything from her and cast her out onto the pavement. The exile was complete. The architect was homeless, and the silence that followed was the sound of absolute zero. The first week of her exile was a silent, suffocating blur. Alara's small, functional apartment, once a sanctuary from the pressures of the office, became her prison. The cardboard box from Innovatech sat in the middle of the living room floor like a miniature tombstone, a monument to her professional death. She didn't unpack it. To do so would be to accept that this new, hollow reality was permanent. Time lost its structure, dissolving into a gray, meaningless cycle of sleepless nights and empty days. She would sit on her sofa for hours, the television on but unseen, replaying the boardroom scene in her mind on an endless, torturous loop. Each time, she would see it with a horrifying new clarity. The subtle smirk on Marcus's face, the practiced ease of Chloe's lies, the cold, dismissive pity in the eyes of the board. The pain of the betrayal was a physical thing, a constant, dull ache that settled deep in her bones. It was the loss of the project that hurt, but it was the loss of the friendship that haunted her. She dissected every conversation, every shared lunch, every late-night work session with Chloe, searching for the moment the truth had diverged from the lie. Had any of it been real? Was the warmth, the laughter, the seemingly genuine support all just part of a long, calculated con? The thought that she had been so blind, so trusting, so profoundly foolish was a deeper humiliation than the firing itself. The world outside her window continued, its relentless pace. Traffic flowed, sirens wailed, life went on, but inside, Alara was frozen, a ghost in her own life, convinced that her career was over and her judgment was irrevocably broken. The intrusion came on a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after her termination. Her phone, which had been silent for days, buzzed with an unknown number from a San Francisco area code. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to let the world remain outside. But on the third buzz, a flicker of something, curiosity, instinct, made her answer. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and tinged with an old-world formality. "Am I speaking with Miss Alara Hayes?" the voice asked. The man introduced himself as David Chen, a senior partner at the law firm of Chen, Covington, and Crowe. He said he was the executor of her late grandfather's estate. Alara's grandfather, Alistair Vanguard, was more of a myth than a memory. A reclusive genius from the pioneering days of microprocessors, he had passed away when she was in college. She remembered him as a tall, quiet man who smelled of old books and soldering flux, his home a labyrinth of esoteric equipment and towering shelves of technical manuals. He had been kind but distant, a man who seemed more comfortable with complex systems than with people, including his own family. He had left her a modest but life-changing trust fund that paid for her education and allowed her to live without debt, a gift for which she was eternally grateful. She assumed this call was about some final, minor paperwork. Mr. Chen requested a meeting in person, his tone suggesting it was a matter of some urgency. The next day, Alara found herself in a quiet, wood-paneled office in the heart of San Francisco's financial district, a world away from the trendy, open-plan chaos of Innovatech. David Chen was an impeccably dressed man in his late 60s, with kind eyes and the patient air of someone accustomed to handling delicate matters. "Miss Hayes," he began, gesturing to a leather-bound portfolio on his large mahogany desk. "Your grandfather was a man who believed in systems, in cause and effect, and he believed, above all, in allowing people to find their own way. The trust he left you for your education was just the visible portion of his estate. He opened the portfolio. Alistair was the founder, and until his death, the sole principal of a private investment firm called Vanguard Holdings. It is not a name you would have heard of. Its strategy was to be the silent partner, the foundational investor in companies that would go on to shape the technological landscape. It is, for lack of a better term, a silent giant. He slid a summary statement across the desk. Alara looked down, but the numbers were so vast, so astronomical, that they ceased to have any meaning. They were abstract concepts, not money. Your grandfather's will was specific, Mr. Chen continued. Upon his death, his entire stake in Vanguard Holdings, which is to say, the entire company, was placed into a secure trust. I have been its steward. The trust stipulated that control would not pass to you until one of two conditions was met. You reached the age of 30, or, in his words, you faced a crucible of professional trial that demonstrated a need for the tools he had left behind. He paused, looking at her over his spectacles. My firm was tasked with monitoring your career. Your recent, and grossly unjust, termination from Innovatic Dynamics has triggered that second clause. The crucible has been faced. As of this morning, you are the sole, controlling owner of Vanguard Holdings. Alara stared at him, speechless. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thick. It was too much to process. It felt like a dream, a fiction. But then, Mr. Chen pushed another document towards her. It was a list of Vanguard's major equity positions. And there, near the top of the list, were two words that made her blood run cold. Innovatech Dynamics. As you can see, Mr. Chen said, his voice gentle but precise, Vanguard Holdings currently owns 18% of Innovatech's common stock. It makes us the second largest institutional shareholder with significant influence and 2 seats on the board of directors. One of those seats has been intentionally kept vacant by my stewardship for the last 3 years, waiting for you. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture so vast and stunning it took her breath away. Then, Mr. Chen delivered the final, transformative revelation. There is one last detail, a matter of identity. Your grandfather deeply respected your wish to forge your own path using your mother's maiden name. But Hayes is not the name on your birth certificate. It is not your legal name. He leaned forward slightly. Your name, Alara, is Vanguard. Alara Vanguard. The name echoed in the silent, wood-paneled room, and in that echo, the broken, grieving girl named Alara Hayes died. The fog of her despair did not just lift, it was incinerated in a sudden, brilliant flash of cold, clarifying rage. The pain of the betrayal was still there, a white-hot coal in her chest, but it was no longer a wound. It was a furnace. It was fuel. She saw the boardroom again, but this time, the lens had changed. She was not the victim on the floor. She was the eagle in the rafters, watching arrogant, short-sighted fools dance on a stage they did not own, fighting over scraps from a table that belonged to her. Marcus Thorne, Chloe Sterling. They were not titans who had crushed her. They were insects briefly illuminated in the headlights of a machine they couldn't see coming. Her quietness, her humility, the very things she had been made to feel were weaknesses, were suddenly reforged into weapons. It was the Vanguard legacy, the power of silence, the strategy of the unseen player. The shy, wounded analyst was gone, burned away in the crucible her grandfather had predicted. In her place sat someone else, someone colder, sharper, and utterly, terrifyingly resolute. She looked up, and for the first time, David Chen saw the reflection of her grandfather in her eyes. "Tell me about the vacant board seat," Alara Vanguard said, her voice even and devoid of all its previous fragility. "And I want a full, unredacted report on Innovatech's current leadership. I want to know everything they've ever done, every project they've ever managed, and every secret they think is safely buried." The phoenix had risen, and her first act would be to learn the scent of her enemies. The transformation of Alara Vanguard was not a loud, sudden explosion, but a quiet, chilling implosion. The fire of her rage didn't burn outwards. It collapsed inwards, forging her grief and humiliation into a core of diamond, hard resolve. She did not rush to the Innovatech tower to announce her return. Vengeance, she instinctively understood, was not a dish best served cold. It was a dish best prepared in a sterile lab, with precise measurements, under controlled conditions, and served at the exact moment of maximum potency. Her first weeks as the head of Vanguard Holdings were spent not in a boardroom but in a library. With David Chen as her guide, she devoured decades of financial reports, case studies, and corporate legal strategy. She learned the secret language of power, a language spoken not in shouts but in proxies, in audits, in shareholder resolutions, and in the deliberate, crushing weight of capital. She was no longer the brilliant coder who saw stories in data. She was the silent owner of the system, now learning where all the levers were hidden. Her apartment remained her home, but her days were spent in the hushed, minimalist headquarters of Vanguard Holdings. It was the antithesis of Innovatech's flashy, performative campus. There were no brightly colored beanbag chairs or inspirational quotes on the walls. There was only quiet, focused work, carried out in rooms that felt more like academic cloisters than corporate offices. Here, Alara's natural silence was not a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be honed. She listened more than she spoke, absorbing the intricate dance of corporate governance with the same intensity she had once applied to her code. And all the while, the plan was crystallizing in her mind, a perfectly structured algorithm of retribution. She would not attack Marcus and Chloe directly. A frontal assault would be emotional, messy, and would expose her personal motives. It would allow them to frame her as a scorned ex-employee on a vendetta. No, her plan was far more elegant and far more cruel. She would not attack the thieves. She would attack their stolen prize. Project Chimera was their claim to fame, their golden ticket. It was also their greatest vulnerability, because they were its presenters, not its architects. They could drive the beautiful, complex car she had built, but they had no idea how the engine actually worked. She would simply force them to open the hood for the world's best mechanics. The first move was made on a Thursday, 6 weeks after her termination. In the main conference room at Vanguard, overlooking the steely waters of the San Francisco Bay, Alara dictated the terms to David Chen and a team of corporate lawyers. Her voice was calm, measured, betraying no emotion as she outlined the official correspondence to be sent to the board of Innovatech Dynamics. It would be a formal request, issued on behalf of Vanguard Holdings as a concerned and significant shareholder, for a full, independent, third-party technical audit of Project Chimera. The reasoning she provided was a masterpiece of corporate subterfuge, each point a carefully poisoned dart disguised as a legitimate business concern. First, she cited potential intellectual property contamination and uncertain provenance, a terrifyingly vague legal phrase that hinted at the possibility that Chimera's code was not entirely Innovatech's own. It was a silent, professional way of calling them thieves. Second, she raised concerns about the project's long-term algorithmic stability and scalability, questioning its very foundation and suggesting that this supposed miracle product might be a house of cards. This was a problem only its true architect could ever solve. Finally, and most brilliantly, she framed the entire request as standard and necessary due diligence. As she explained in the letter, Vanguard Holdings was impressed by the project's reported potential, and as a major investor, it wished to fully assess the value, risks, and security protocols of what was now being touted as Innovatech's single most valuable intellectual asset before approving the next round of executive performance bonuses, which were, she knew, tied directly to Chimera's launch. The email landed in the inbox of Arthur Sterling, Innovatech's CEO, like a torpedo hitting the hull of a ship. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Vanguard Holdings was not some noisy activist investor one could dismiss. They were the quiet money, the smart money, a silent giant whose infrequent communications were treated with the gravity of a papal decree. A request from them was not a request. It was a command, veiled in polite corporate language. The CEO's initial annoyance quickly curdled into genuine fear. An audit of this nature was invasive, expensive, and, if it found anything wrong, potentially ruinous to the company's stock price and reputation. The shockwave hit Marcus Thorne's office minutes later via a furious, panicked call from the CEO. Marcus, who had been riding a wave of unprecedented praise since the presentation, felt the floor drop out from under him. His triumphant narrative was suddenly under siege. He and Chloe were summoned to an emergency meeting, the celebratory atmosphere of the past few weeks instantly replaced by one of suspicion and intense pressure. Their initial reaction was a blustering defense. "It's just a formality, Arthur," Marcus insisted, his usual charm strained. "Vanguard is known for being overly cautious. Chloe and I have everything under control. The project is flawless." But the seed of panic had been planted. Chloe, who had been enjoying her new status and the adulation of her colleagues, felt a cold dread creep up her spine. An audit? By whom? They were informed that Vanguard had specified the terms. The audit would be conducted by a legendary, notoriously ruthless cybersecurity and code analysis firm from Zurich. They were the best in the world, famous for their ability to find flaws in the most secure systems. They would be given unfettered access to everything: the complete source code, the server logs, the development history, and all associated documentation. Marcus and Chloe were now the sole custodians of a black box, and a team of expert technicians was on its way to pry it open, live on stage. Back in her new office, Alara Vanguard watched the internal, high-level email traffic of Innovatech light up on a secure monitor. She saw the panicked exchanges, the scheduling of emergency meetings, the frantic requests for documentation. She was the ghost in their machine, the silent observer watching her enemies scurry in the trap she had just set. She felt no joy, no triumphant glee. She only felt a calm, chilling sense of purpose. She had built Chimera to predict the future based on external data. Now, she would watch as it predicted the future of its fraudulent owners, based on the single, unstable variable she had just introduced into their lives: the absolute, unforgiving pressure of the truth. The game had begun. The arrival of the auditors was not an arrival at all. There were no stern-faced Europeans in dark suits walking through the lobby. There was only an email, a single, sterile notification from Innovatech's CTO, announcing that a secure, encrypted virtual portal had been opened. The Zurich team had been granted root access to the Chimera servers. For the employees of Innovatech, it was a minor piece of corporate news. For Marcus Thorne and Chloe Sterling, it was the sound of a clock starting to tick, a slow, methodical countdown to their own destruction. Their stolen kingdom now had an invisible, omniscient observer, and the walls began to close in with terrifying speed. At first, they maintained a facade of calm, professional confidence. "It's a standard review," Marcus told his own nervous team, his voice smooth and reassuring. "A chance for us to showcase the integrity of our work." Chloe, in her new role as lead data scientist, projected an air of bored competence, treating the audit as a minor distraction from her more important, visionary work. But behind the closed doors of her spacious new office, a frantic, desperate scramble had begun. The polished presentation was over. Now came the terrifying, unscripted reality. And reality, it turned out, had bugs. They were small at first, insignificant glitches that would be expected in any project of Chimera's scale. A data visualization module would occasionally freeze. A specific predictive model for the German equities market would produce intermittent, nonsensical outputs, data phantoms that would appear and vanish without explanation. Under normal circumstances, these were minor issues to be logged and fixed. But these were not normal circumstances. The CEO, now under immense pressure himself, wanted every single flaw patched and polished before the auditors could find them. The project had to be perfect, flawless, a pristine representation of the lie they had told the board. The task fell to Chloe. It was her name on the project, her title, her supposed genius. The first few days, she approached the problem with a misplaced arrogance, the confidence of a performer who had received a standing ovation. She delved into the code, the millions of lines of Alara's intricate, elegant logic. And it was there, alone in the silent, humming server room late at night, that the true, horrifying scale of her ignorance was revealed to her. She had been a brilliant student of the material, a perfect mimic. She had memorized the what of the project, but she had never once understood the why. Ilara's code was not just functional, it was personal, almost biological. Modules were interconnected in ways that were not immediately obvious, a complex web of dependencies and relationships that reflected Ellora's unique, holistic way of thinking. It was a cathedral of logic, and Chloe was like a tourist with a stolen floor plan, unable to comprehend the architectural principles that kept the entire structure from collapsing. When she tried to patch the glitch in the German equities model, a dozen other, unrelated processes would suddenly fail. When she tried to fix the memory leak in the visualization module, the core predictive algorithm would slow to a crawl. Every clumsy attempt she made to fix one crack only created 3 more elsewhere. Her confidence began to fray, then to tear, and finally it dissolved into a cold, raw panic. She was an imposter, a fraud, and the machine itself, Ellora's silent, logical creation, seemed to be rejecting her at every turn. Marcus, insulated from the technical details, was growing impatient. His expertise was in managing perceptions, and the perception of Project Chimera was rapidly souring. The audit liaison, a dry, humorless man from the CTO's office, would forward him the preliminary queries from the Zurich team, each one a dagger of terrifying specificity. They weren't asking about performance metrics, they were asking about foundational principles. Please clarify the logic behind the weighted decay function in the sentiment analysis module. Please provide the original thesis for the data harmonics correlation engine. They were questions only the true architect could answer. The partnership between Marcus and Chloe, forged in the heat of shared ambition, began to melt under the fire of shared accountability. The charming mentor was gone, replaced by a cold, demanding tyrant. The phone calls became more frequent, his tone sharper. "What's the status, Chloe? The CEO is asking for an update. Are you telling me you can't fix a simple glitch?" He saw his own future, his reputation, his immense bonus, all tied to the competence of a woman he was rapidly discovering was completely out of her depth. The breaking point came late one night in Chloe's office. Marcus stormed in, waving a printout of the latest query list from the auditors. "They're asking about the rollback protocols," he hissed, throwing the papers onto her desk. "They've detected what they're calling architectural redundancies that aren't in the documentation. What the hell does that mean?" Chloe, haggard and sleep-deprived, her face pale under the fluorescent lights, finally snapped. "How should I know, Marcus?" She shot back, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "I'm not her. I don't have her brain. I know what she told me. I know what I memorized. You were the one who said that would be enough. You were the one who said, just sell the story. I'll handle the rest. I told you to take ownership of the project," he countered, his voice a low, vicious snarl. "I told you to learn it inside and out. I put you on that stage. I gave you that promotion, and you assured me you could handle it." "I am handling it," she cried, gesturing wildly at the screens filled with incomprehensible code. "But this isn't a presentation. There's no script here. This is a living thing she built, and it's fighting me. This is your mess as much as it is mine. You wanted the glory. You wanted to present the board with a miracle, and you didn't care how it was made." The truth was finally laid bare between them in the sterile, oversized office. There was no loyalty. There was no team. There was only a shared, desperate self-interest that was now diverging. He saw her as the ticking time bomb that would blow up his career. She saw him as the coward who would not hesitate to cut her loose to save himself. The trust between them, which had always been an illusion, was now completely gone, replaced by a raw, primal paranoia. The next day, Marcus Thorne spent 2 hours in a closed-door meeting with the head of legal and HR, quietly inquiring about the termination protocols for a senior employee in a case of gross technical incompetence. At the same time, across the office, Chloe Sterling was methodically creating a secure, private backup of every email, every private chat, every project-related document that included Marcus's name, preparing the evidence she would need to prove he was not just her manager, but her co-conspirator. The facade had crumbled. The thieves had turned on each other, and they were now busily constructing the very gallows from which they would both hang. The end began with an email, delivered simultaneously to Marcus Thorne and Chloe Sterling at precisely 8 a.m. on a Monday. It was from the office of the CEO. The subject line contained only 3 words: mandatory board meeting. The body of the message was brief and cold, stating that their presence was required at 2 p.m. to discuss the preliminary findings of the Chimera technical audit. There was no room for negotiation, no option to decline. It was a summons, and it felt like a verdict. The weeks of mounting pressure, of sleepless nights spent chasing ghosts in the code and pointing fingers in the dark, had all led to this. They both knew, with a sickening certainty, that they were no longer walking into the boardroom as celebrated visionaries. They were walking in as defendants. They spent the morning separately, each locked in their own private hell of preparation and damage control. Marcus rehearsed his speech, a carefully crafted narrative of unforeseen complexities and minor, manageable oversights, all designed to shift the blame towards the project's technical execution while preserving his own strategic oversight. He would paint Chloe as a brilliant but perhaps overly ambitious leader who had stumbled under the immense pressure. He would be the statesman, expressing regret but remaining firmly in control. Chloe, meanwhile, compiled her own dossier of evidence, a timeline of emails and meeting notes that would subtly implicate Marcus not just as a manager, but as a driving force behind every decision, every shortcut, every lie. They were no longer partners in crime. They were 2 drowning sailors, each prepared to push the other's head underwater for one more gasp of air. When the time came, they met outside the boardroom doors, the same doors through which they had walked to triumphant applause just a few months earlier. Now, the silence between them was thick with accusation and fear. "Stick to the script, Chloe," Marcus muttered, not looking at her, his jaw tight. "We emphasize the project's overall success and frame these as typical launch phase challenges." Chloe gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. Her own face, a pale, brittle mask. "Don't worry, Marcus," she said, her voice like ice. "I know exactly what to say." They were led into the room not to the lectern, but to 2 isolated chairs at the far end of the long obsidian table, opposite the CEO. The atmosphere was glacial. The board members were all present, their faces grim and unreadable. The air of celebration from the last meeting had been replaced by the somber, oppressive weight of a tribunal. Arthur Sterling, the CEO, began without pleasantry. "As you know," he said, his voice flat and hard, "we are here to discuss the preliminary findings of the audit requested by Vanguard Holdings. To say those findings are deeply concerning would be a gross understatement. The report details significant architectural discrepancies, undocumented and unstable code, and security vulnerabilities that represent a catastrophic exposure for this company." He paused, his cold gaze sweeping over Marcus and then Chloe. "Before we review the specifics, however, there is another matter of business." Marcus shifted in his seat, ready to launch into his defense, but the CEO held up a hand, silencing him. "In light of this situation, Vanguard Holdings has expressed its grave concern for the company's governance and technical oversight. As is their right under our shareholder agreement, they have chosen to fill their vacant board seat, effective immediately, to personally oversee the resolution of this crisis." A murmur went through the room. This was a significant move, a clear vote of no confidence. For Marcus and Chloe, it was a tiny, fleeting reprieve. The focus, for a moment, was shifting away from them. They had no idea the guillotine was simply being raised higher. "Please welcome the new board member representing Vanguard Holdings," the CEO announced, his voice devoid of any warmth. The grand, heavy doors at the end of the boardroom swung silently open, and then she walked in. Time seemed to bend and warp. For Marcus and Chloe, the moment stretched into an eternity of cognitive dissonance. The woman who entered was not who they were expecting. She was the picture of quiet, formidable power, dressed in a tailored, dark gray suit that was both elegant and severe. Her posture was perfect, her stride was unhurried and confident, but it was her face that shattered their reality. It was a face they knew, but transformed. The shy, downcast eyes were gone, replaced by a gaze that was calm, direct, and as cold as deep space. The hesitant, almost apologetic demeanor had been replaced by an aura of absolute, unshakable self-possession. It was, impossibly, the face of Alara Hayes. Their minds scrambled to make sense of the impossible. Who is this? A relative? A look-alike? Marcus felt a wave of vertigo, his carefully prepared speech turning to ash in his mouth. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs, a wild, panicked bird trapped in a cage. They stared, their mouths agape, as the woman took a seat at the main table, a seat reserved for the architects of the company's fate. And then the CEO delivered the final, devastating blow. "Gentlemen, please welcome Miss Ilara Vanguard." The name hit them with the force of a physical impact. Vanguard, the name of the faceless, terrifying entity that had been tormenting them for weeks. The name of the silent giant that held their careers, their very futures in its hands. They both looked back at her face, truly seeing it for the first time, and the last pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with brutal, world-ending force. The quiet analyst they had used, the humble coder they had betrayed, the ghost they had created, the girl they had thrown out like trash. She was not a ghost. She was a dynasty. Ilara Vanguard did not look at them. She did not acknowledge their presence. She simply placed her portfolio on the table, opened it, and gave a small, formal nod to the CEO, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Her silence was the most terrifying sound they had ever heard. It was the silence of a judge who had already heard all the evidence and reached a verdict. It was the silence of absolute power. Marcus and Chloe had come to the meeting prepared to fight for their careers. They realized, in that single, soul-shattering moment, that they had actually been summoned to attend their own execution. And the executioner was the woman they had so casually, so thoughtlessly destroyed. The silence in the boardroom was a living entity, thick and suffocating. Marcus and Chloe were frozen in their chairs, their faces bloodless masks of horror, their eyes locked on the impossible specter of Ilara Vanguard. The other board members, sensing a corporate drama of unprecedented scale unfolding, shifted uncomfortably, their gazes flicking between the CEO, the two disgraced executives, and the calm, silent woman who now sat at their table. The CEO, Arthur Sterling, cleared his throat, his expression one of cold fury. He turned not to Marcus or Chloe, but to the room's new center of gravity. "Miss Vanguard," he said, his voice tight with a deference that had been absent moments before. "Perhaps you can enlighten us." Ilara gave a slow, deliberate nod. She did not raise her voice. She did not stand. She simply commanded the room from her seat, her calm a stark contrast to the panicked, ragged breathing of her two accusers. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice even and clear, "you have been presented with the preliminary findings of the Zurich audit. Those findings are, of course, accurate. Project Chimera, in its current state, is unstable, poorly documented, and a significant liability. But I must be clear, the audit was never the objective. It was merely a diagnostic tool." She paused, letting her words sink in, her gaze sweeping across the powerful faces at the table. It was a way to apply pressure to a diseased system in order to confirm the symptoms. The disease itself is far more severe. It is a disease of intellectual property theft, corporate fraud, and executive malfeasance. A wave of shock rippled through the room. Marcus started to speak, a desperate, sputtering denial forming on his lips. "Now, hold on. This is an outrageous." Ilara cut him off, not by raising her voice, but by simply continuing to speak as if he were nothing more than a buzzing fly. "A good architect," she continued, her eyes fixed on the CEO, "understands that any system of immense complexity must have fail-safes, not just for operational stability, but for integrity. Hidden tools that are invisible to the user, and even to the administrator, unless you know the precise keys to unlock them. When I built Chimera, I built such a tool. I call it the Chronos log." The name meant nothing to them, but the quiet authority with which she spoke sent a fresh wave of dread through Marcus and Chloe. "The Chronos log," Ilara explained, "is an immutable, deeply encrypted record embedded in the project's kernel. It is not a bug report. It is the system's perfect memory. It records every single action taken within the development environment, every file access, every transfer, every line of code altered or deleted. Every action is time-stamped to the nanosecond and tagged with the user's credentials, their network ID, and their machine's IP address. It cannot be altered, it cannot be deleted. It can only be observed. With a calm, fluid motion, she reached into her portfolio and retrieved a small, slate-gray laptop. She connected it to the boardroom's main projector system. The familiar, sleek interface of Project Chimera appeared on the massive screen at the front of the room, the same screen where Chloe had so confidently presented her stolen triumph. But then, Ilara's fingers moved across the keyboard, typing a long, complex string of characters, an authorization code that was a symphony of impossible length. The main interface dissolved, replaced by something else, a clean, elegant, visual timeline. The Chronos log. What you are seeing, Ilara narrated, her voice as clinical as a surgeon's, is the complete, unabridged history of Project Chimera's creation. She started the timeline in the early months. The log showed a single dominant user, E. Hayes. It showed the creation of files, the writing of code, the steady, relentless progress of a lone architect. Then, she advanced the timeline. A second user appeared, C. Sterling. The log displayed in stark, undeniable graphics a clear pattern. A file would be created by E. Hayes. Minutes, sometimes hours later, that same file would be accessed by C. Sterling. Then, a few seconds after that, the log would show a data packet of the exact same size being copied from the secure development server to Chloe's local machine. She let the damning visual play out in silence for a moment. The entire room could see it. A systematic, methodical, relentless campaign of theft, recorded in perfect, indisputable detail. She then advanced the timeline to the weeks following her termination. The log became a frantic mess of red flags. It showed Chloe's credentials attempting to alter core modules, followed by a cascade of system-wide error reports. And then came the final, irrefutable proof of the conspiracy. Ilara highlighted a series of entries. At 11:42 p.m. on the 3rd of October, she said, her voice devoid of emotion, multiple critical error logs related to Miss Sterling's failed code alterations were deleted. The credentials used belonged to Marcus Thorne. At 2:17 a.m. on the 5th of October, Mr. Thorne's executive credentials were used again, this time to manually override a system lockout and grant Miss Sterling's account administrative permissions to the core architecture, permissions for which she was never authorized. The timeline on the screen was a confession, written in the absolute language of data. There was no room for interpretation, no possibility of denial. It was the truth, raw and inescapable. Chloe made a small, choked sound, like a dying animal. Marcus sat ramrod straight, his face the color of ash, his carefully constructed world having been utterly demolished in the space of 5 minutes. "This is fabricated," he finally managed to stammer, his voice a pathetic caricature of his former authority. "This is some kind of trick. She's a disgruntled employee who—" The CEO slammed his hand down on the table, the sound like a gunshot in the silent room. "Enough," he roared, his face purple with rage. He looked at Marcus and Chloe with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Enough. Not another word." He turned to the head of security, who had been standing silently by the door. "Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Thorne and Miss Sterling from the premises. Their employment with Innovatech Dynamics is terminated, effective immediately. Collect their badges, their phones, their laptops. They are not to touch anything." As the 2 security guards approached, the CEO delivered the final sentences. "And be advised," he said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal growl, "that this board will be instructing our legal counsel to pursue every available civil and criminal charge against you both. Corporate espionage, wire fraud, securities fraud, for deliberately misleading this board and our investors. We will ensure that you never work in this industry or any other again." It was over. The last vestiges of their defiance crumbled. Chloe began to sob, a pathetic, gulping sound. Marcus simply stared into space, a man already hollowed out, as the guards took them by the arms and led them, stumbling, from the room. They were not just fired, they were ruined, their names and careers destined to become a cautionary tale of corporate greed and spectacular downfall. The heavy doors closed behind them, leaving a profound and ringing silence. On the giant screen, the Chronos log still glowed, a silent, beautiful monument to the truth. Alara Vanguard sat at the table, her face unreadable, her work complete. Justice had not been a matter of passion. It had been a matter of code. In the profound, ringing silence that followed the removal of Marcus Thorne and Chloe Sterling, the damning evidence of the Chronos log still glowed on the boardroom screen, a digital epitaph for 2 ruined careers. The remaining board members, a council of the most powerful men and women in the industry, sat stunned, grappling with the sheer scale of the deception that had occurred under their watch. The CEO, Arthur Sterling, looked as though he had aged a decade in the last 10 minutes. He had survived the immediate crisis, but his company was now deeply wounded, its most celebrated project exposed as a fraud, and its governance shown to be a sham. He looked across the table at the source of both his ruin and his potential salvation, Alara Vanguard. His expression shifted from fury to a desperate, calculated reverence. He saw not the ghost of a wronged employee, but the cold, clear-eyed principal of one of his most powerful investors. He saw the only person on the planet who could possibly fix the mess. "Miss Vanguard," he began, his voice raspy with the effort of swallowing his pride. "On behalf of this board, and this entire company, I offer you our most profound and sincere apology. What was done to you was not just unprofessional, it was reprehensible. It is a stain on the legacy of Innovatic, one that we must now work tirelessly to remove." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table, a king pleading with a foreign power. "We need you," he said, the words heavy with desperation. "Clearly, you are the only one who truly understands this technology. We would like to offer you the position of Chief Technology Officer, effective immediately, a full board seat, of course, a compensation package. Well, you can essentially write your own check. Name your price, name your terms. Just please, help us salvage Chimera. Help us make this right." It was the ultimate corporate surrender, the grand prize offered to the victor, the keys to the kingdom she had been so brutally cast out of. Alara listened to the offer in complete silence, her expression unreadable. She let the CEO's words hang in the air, a testament to his desperation. When he was finished, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, not agreement. "Thank you for the generous offer, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice calm and even. "But I'm afraid my professional interests no longer align with the future of Innovatech Dynamics." A new, colder chill descended upon the room. The CEO stared at her, confused. I don't understand," he stammered. "My work here is done," Alara said, as she began to calmly gather her things. "Vanguard Holdings has a fiduciary duty to its partners to mitigate risk, and what I have seen here today represents an unacceptable level of systemic, cultural rot. The problem wasn't just 2 rogue employees. It was a system that allowed them to flourish." She stood up, her presence filling the room. "However," she added, "I did come to appreciate the strategic value of a tool like Chimera, a tool that powerful deserves to be in the hands of a company with the integrity to wield it." She looked directly at Arthur Sterling, a man who had, just a few hours ago, been one of the most powerful figures in her world. "My first official act as the controlling principal of Vanguard Holdings, which was finalized this morning, was to authorize the all-cash acquisition of your largest and most innovative competitor, Cygnus Innovations." The shock in the room was palpable, a silent, collective gasp. Cygnus was their fiercest rival, a smaller, more agile company that was constantly poaching their talent and beating them to market. "And my second act," Alara continued, delivering the killing blow, was to accept their board's offer to step in as their new chief executive officer. "My first order of business, beginning tomorrow, will be to greenlight the development of a new predictive analytics engine. We'll call it Chimera 2.0. It will be faster, more powerful, and built on a foundation of ethical design by a team that values collaboration over credit." She paused, then added one final, devastating detail. "A team that will include some of Innovatech's most brilliant and most consistently overlooked senior engineers. I believe you'll be receiving their letters of resignation by the end of the day." She had not come back to reclaim her job. She had come back to announce the beginning of a new dynasty, a rival empire built on the ashes of their failure, staffed by the very talent they had been too arrogant to appreciate. It was not just revenge. It was a corporate decapitation. She walked toward the door, then stopped, turning back to face the stunned, silent CEO one last time. "There is a lesson here, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice dropping to a quiet, almost philosophical tone. "A lesson I hope you will remember." She let the silence stretch, forcing every eye to meet hers. Never, ever underestimate the silence of a person who has endured for too long, because when they finally decide to make their move, they do not do it with words, they do it with power. And with that, Alara Vanguard walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the ruins of a company and the birth of a legend. Her story at Innovatech was over. A masterclass in the art of corporate justice. A reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding all the cards. But in the glass towers that scrape the skies across the nation, the games of ambition, greed, and betrayal never truly end. And in a different city, at a different firm, a loyal assistant who knows every single one of his boss's dirty secrets has just been told his position is being eliminated. His story is just beginning. Join us next time for another dispatch.